Hey there. Before we start this episode, I just wanted to talk about something that happened this week. If you were a colleague of mine at Aperio, you might have known Jill Brabender. She passed away this week, and it was shocking, right? Because I mean, when I knew her, she seemed healthy and vibrant. That's one thing that anyone who worked with her would describe her as vibrant. And it's hard when you lose a colleague, and in consulting, it's a difficult job, and we spent time on the road, um, meetings with clients and potential clients, and you'll really never forget those times. And our coworkers, they're not family, but there's something close, right? There's a bond that I think we all feel with our colleagues, and when they leave us too early, it hurts, and Jill was a special person. She uh, loved her family. I got to meet her daughter one time while we were traveling. I know she had another daughter and a son. She talked about them all the time. We compare notes on parenthood, and it's just, and I know she worked at also other places. She worked at Accenture, and she worked at MTX and Cloud for Good and a few other places. So I know there's a lot of people in the consulting world who knew her and loved her. So it's funny, this episode has Brian Reynolds, and I just remember traveling Brian and Jill and us figuring out just work, right? Like how to do what we're gonna do, and difficult times and fun times. So this episode's for Jill, and I know we'll miss her, and I feel for her loved ones. I'll pray for them, and I know I'll see Jill on the other side, so she'll be holding a glass of wine, and we'll swap stories. So I look forward to that. So here's to you, Jill. All right, we are here with Brian Reynolds. I've known Brian for quite a few years. We were colleagues at Purio. We had a lot of adventures. Um, and now
We did have adventures.
yes. And I was thinking you're currently at Salesforce. And I thought, man, in high school, you'd probably be voted the least likely to end up as a Salesforce employee. But
Yes, John, good to see you.
Yes.
The fond memories come rushing right back, and I love the term adventures because I feel like could be a separate podcast. Would be adventures in cloud computing, but
Yes. But I guess to start, we're nearly the same age, and none of us
mhm,
dreamed of being in the cloud computing
mhm,
industry because it didn't exist, right? So
correct, correct.
correct me if I'm wrong, but you came into this through the vestiges or the ruins of what was left of the mortgage industry. Is that correct? Or
Yes,
how did you get into the cloud?
yes, it is. So I think so quickly would be not your traditional hire. So I hear the non-traditional backgrounds, coming into the talent pool, and I'm like, I know, I made it here. But yes, succinctly, I was in the mortgage business, coming up into that 2007 year is when really a lot of the mortgage companies went under. I was in a B2B role doing stuff that's not all that relevant, but that softness hit that market in 2007. And really, I didn't fully recover into another job, um, which was a little PR software platform job till August of 2009. So yes, roaming the wilderness, virtually unemployable in a very soft labor market, with a lot of soul searching uh, to do. But yes, that was my way in.
Yeah, I remember 2007. I started business school that year, and a lot of my fellow students were like, I'm going to make it big in finance.
Hmm.
And then they're
Yeah,
like, not so fast.
yeah,
Maybe
yes.
timing isn't on your side.
Okay, it's
So,
funny. I did enter too back into school late, a little bit touch later than you did, as
okay,
the what I call the reinvention, the reclamation project of Brian Reynolds.
the reclamation of Brian Reynolds coming to a theater near you. You
Yeah.
were at Seven Summits, I suspect was the first ecosystem that you were
Yep.
in.
Yeah, absolutely. We were yet to be a Salesforce partner. There was a Jive only partner at the time when hired there. As Salesforce had just about 7 or 8 months into my tenure there as a very green bean rookie sales rep, um, did Salesforce roll out communities as a product and then began recruiting firms that had a sensibility like Seven Summits that was really invested into, that kind of community first approach and engagement pretty early on, so to speak. So,
Mm.
yep,
Yeah. A lot of people know Seven Summits because of their communities work, but few know that it started with Jive,
this is true.
if
This is
you
a true
remember
story.
Jive at all. So
Uh,
at Aperio, right? How did you end up at Aperio?
so the time to move on from Seven Summits kind of was handed to me, if you
Yes.
will. So good healthy firing is always good. But no, the company was changing there. Private equity is coming in. A lot of decisions being made. A lot of new personnel coming in. So I wound up going out at Seven Summits and got a referral over to through a partner manager at the time, Greg Reed, in Salesforce, who was, been around for a long time. He knew the ins and outs of the ecosystem, and he was able to help kind of position me and my background with some firms in the Chicagoland area that were looking to add sales headcount. And one of those was Aperio, and I was fortunate enough to run the gauntlet and get an offer from them as they stood out as a partner to kind of want to be with. Even as someone kind of new into the business, you got that vibe from Aperio is that
Yeah.
that was a place where stuff was happening. There were smart people there, and they were a little unconventional, perhaps, and non-traditional, but it seemed to be working. And I was like, I think I could really accelerate my career if I could get in with these guys.
Yeah. And getting back to being fired, a lot of people think getting fired is the end of the world, right? When it happens. But I mean, look what it did for Billy Martin, if you're a baseball
Yeah,
fan.
I mean, he liked it so much he did it several times with the same
Yeah.
organization.
We
Yeah,
all need a Steinbrenner in our lives.
yeah. Oh my God.
So I saw you firsthand as a sales rep at
Mhm.
Aperio, and those were some of the adventures that I referred to. I saw you do a lot of things that was just kind of personality based. That's something I have a different personality that you. I think we meshed well together, if I speak
Mhm.
freely.
Mhm.
Um, what was it that drove you as a sales rep, and how did you succeed in that world?
Man, good question. It's a performance-driven business, right? So fortunately, you don't have to think a lot about it. You just understand what your comp model is and kind of how you are going to make and build a career once you're in a sales function. So, I guess early on it was a lot of willpower. It wasn't easy, but um, yeah, that it was make it or break it mentality.
Yeah,
Was really how I wound up in a sales function in the earliest places in my life, right? So
yeah,
I didn't have to think about it a whole lot. I don't know if that's the greatest answer or not, but it's more primal or instinctual. It's just like
instinctual.
yeah, I have to make it happen kind of mindset.
And selling services is particularly difficult, right? Because it's like the product that you're selling varies greatly, and these poor consultants are going into a world that maybe it's a dysfunction. I always call it like any organization over two people is inherently dysfunctional, right? Every family
Yes,
is
yes,
dysfunctional,
true.
and some of them are just they say snotty things at dinner, and some of them are throwing bricks at each other, right?
Yeah, as to
So
what level of dysfunction am I dealing with today is kind of the
right.
sense that's where you come at it from.
So post Aperio, I know you went to WooBot, which
Correct.
was tell us about WooBot and was the difference between selling services and selling a product.
Yeah, selling services is it's that intangible. You're selling a vision, right? And you're selling confidence at the end of the day. Is that as I think, our personalities are different. I think we worked very well together. And my job was just to be soberly honest with people and say, look across the table and say, look, you've interviewed 3 firms at this point. I'm sure our slides all look alike by now, right? And we're not necessarily dressed all that differently. And at the end of the day, our pitches aren't universally that much different. So because the scope of your project isn't the most unique thing that anyone's ever seen. So there's a lot of commonality here. So at the end of the day, you're going to pick the group of people that you feel the most confident in delivering success, because that success is an outcome that is, 3, 6, 8, 9, 12 months down the road from where we're sitting right now. So that can it's assembling the team and the people and showcasing your firm's people that allows that confidence to happen. Because at the end, Brian's just the guy who's going to jockey the DocuSign with you. These are the people that are going to execute the tough stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting answer. When I think of sales, I don't usually think of sober or honest. But
Yeah, yes. And that's what differentiation strategy means, John, So that was about it, right? Let me tell you why this thing's going to fail type of approach,
right.
instead of why you're going to do so great because we're going to ensure your success.
Yeah.
No, I'd rather talk about what happens when it gets ugly. Let's talk about that first,
Right.
because and then all of a sudden people start to say, wait a minute, no one's telling me this. These other firms aren't speaking like this. They're telling me how everything's going to be great. And one person's over there saying, hey, what happens if it gets screwed up?
Hmm.
How does the organization think and then react then? Because we're kind of partners in this. One of the metaphors we used to talk about, John, was, it's a delivering a software project is like building a house. And I said, yeah, that's fairly true, except you don't ask the homeowner to pick up a tool belt and put it on in the process, right? Where you ask the customer, you don't ask, they're required to put on a tool belt to be a part of the building the house. So,
Yeah.
there's a dependency there.
That's really interesting, because the instinct is to sell them the happy path of everything that's going to go well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been a part of a zillion projects, and even the successful ones go sideways, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking at Perio, I was at one project, it was scoped for 6 weeks, and 18 months later,
Mm-hmm.
I was still there in their office,
Yeah,
still coding.
yeah.
And
Well,
they
how
would call it a
comfortable was it
success.
by month 17?
I mean, there were some angry moments, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
at the end, we all popped the champagne and called it success, right? And
It's
it's just,
expectation setting and management, and that's where your credibility is going to come from, in a lot of ways. But
yeah.
so yeah, that's my take on the services spin. The product spin was different. We were all very excited. We used to say we're recovering services people, as we were in our little startup selling licenses. And the straight sales play, the motion is essentially the same, qualifying and, the funnel and all that fun stuff. The difference is that I can point to a button on a screen, and when it works, that's kind of the scope of the conversation, that tangible component's there. Um, so that was probably the biggest piece. But what we found oftentimes were the buying questions that mattered most were, who's going to take this piece of software and roll it out for my team? And we were a very small operation. We didn't support services. We hadn't forged relationships with places like Atrium or Aperio or anybody in between. So it was interesting how the services component ultimately was driving the success of the license sale in the end, because people could understand that I understand that your button works and it executes this little process that sits behind it, but who's going to get it into my people's hands?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So you were in this little firm that you thought you got away from services, but you kind of didn't.
Kind of didn't. And then, the world got really weird at the end of 19, at the beginning of 20. And like many small software companies, this one wasn't going to get to the next stage.
Yeah.
And I wound up at Slack,
Right.
managing partners, managing SI partners as they're building out the very early days of an
Right.
SI partner program. And that experience of having carried a bag through the Salesforce ecosystem and having poked around a little bit in the Slack customer base trying to sell some product, landed me, kind of full circle in March of 2020 as the pandemic was breaking out.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting full circle there. Or maybe not, you tell me.
To me, it's interesting, but I mean, I've been a Slack user,
Yeah.
right? here and there. I don't currently use it, so but I'm familiar with that little knocking sound that always
Yes,
used to give me panic attacks if it was my
yes,
boss. But
yes.
um,
Try working
what
here.
what was Slack's attitude towards partners, and what does a Slack partner look like? What do they do?
Yeah. Well, gosh, that's such a good. You're a great question asker, John.
Thank you.
Um, so attitude towards partners was we're just starting to think about that. It's kind of funny to think Slack's roughly a 7, 8 year old company to begin with. It's been quite a ride, and they were able to reach a lot of sales levels and customer acquisition and stuff like that without being super dependent on a services function. Even internally, there's the old
Mhm.
freemium play. Hey, come download us, start for free, use it. You'll bump into a wall and how much is available free. Then you'll start to pay a little bit and you can use some more and do some more stuff and keep doing that until, oh my God, this is an enterprise piece of software now. It gets everywhere. We used to talk about the Salesforce measles.
Yeah,
Remember,
yeah.
about all these just rogue and Salesforce environments that would pop up inside of a company. Similarly with Slack. So their journey in services has been a little bit different than you might think, because it was deployed into IT function quite frequently. Software
Yeah.
engineers were developing code with Slack tied into their code repositories and their ticketing engines, and they were just working in hyper speed in Slack to facilitate that. Though that scope of work didn't come with a huge services attached to it when you're selling Slack to engineers to deploy for engineers. They're
Right. Right.
like we
Right.
got
Right.
we got this,
We got this.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
And me coming at it from, I think Salesforce plus Slack is going to be the next big thing back exiting the Apereo days, was I was looking for a complementary software platform to build experience around,
Yeah.
to kind of marry up with my Salesforce kind of background as you continue to try and build a niche career, marrying up, the right technologies. And I thought this cross section would matter. And it wasn't clear right away. It wasn't clear until December of 2020, I believe it was, when Salesforce made an announcement that they were going to acquire Slack. Um, and then took another 7 or 8 months to actually close that acquisition. So it
Sure.
was a long limbo where we couldn't work on this together. But yeah, that's and so the services partner question that you're asking, what was a Slack partner look like?
Yeah.
Um, Very different now. It's the Salesforce partners that we're trying to skill up. Atrium is one of those partners that we're working on getting things started. But prior to that, it was an IT partner that was kind of concentrating on migrations, and maybe an Atlassian partner was a place that we would look for
Mhm.
to develop like one of our early stage partners. But the knowledge worker and rolling Slack out to business workers and knowledge workers around the Salesforce platform is going to come with a uniquely different opportunity for our services partners,
Yeah.
to help lead in that work.
Is this something the bigger partners like Accenture or Deloitte are looking at, or
Oh
is it
yeah,
mostly
yeah.
niche?
No, well, they are now they're active in building out their partnership, but it took a little while because without Salesforce behind it, they weren't sure that they saw a huge business. And I think
Right.
you probably more than most would understand it is those large firms will follow someone into a market. They
Yeah.
don't lead into them. They want to know how I can do 50, $100 million a year in services based off of what you're talking about, where we were still visionary, with
Right.
Slack saying, hey, this is going to be the next big thing. And being an evangelist a bit and finding these partners that were generally more nimble, more down market, more startup-y, that said, yeah, I think so too, and we are willing to forward bet that there's something here, which is
Yeah.
tough for a services business to do when that marriage or that balance of staffing up in correlation with a pipeline that's closing it's a balancing act, and
Yeah.
if you're advocating for partnership that might not have a steady or a healthy or a very predictable pipeline that partners can see, it makes business sense for them to wait.
Right.
But we
Right.
need people to go now. So selling the first mover advantage was something
Right.
we were trying to position quite a bit.
Yeah. One thing I like to talk to people a lot about are acquisitions and like what it's like to
Mm-hmm.
be a part of one. So
Yeah.
from an outsider perspective, it seems like Slack and Salesforce's cultures were not all that different. Is that true? I mean, what was Slack's culture and how
Yeah,
have things changed since you've been acquired?
yeah, it's a great question. I think their values are very consistent. They're both, very much value-led organizations, and those values are pretty aligned. I think you have your San Francisco kind of Bay Area SaaS organizations. There's just a culture to that,
Yeah.
that is pretty the same. I think what the major differences were is more about just how the motion of doing things, like the motion for partnering at
Yeah.
Salesforce is pretty crisp. Here it was, or with Slack, it's nascent, right?
Yeah.
So it was, because at first glance, I think the people that I've talked to while straddling both companies and integrating new partners in was just a reminder that Slack is a pretty young organization, for it to be kind of thrust into the large spotlight of a $27 billion acquisition, basically, I don't know, 8 years into their life cycle. It's
Right.
kind of interesting. So yeah, it's some of the maturity in the process and partnering and like the way sellers sell and, the how they're positioning and the motion that supports it all and how you work across several stakeholders and partners, in order to execute, some complex selling.
Right. Uh, were you surprised when it came down or no?
Not, I was probably one of the few that weren't. I don't know if I should say that. You might want to edit that. But I had bet my life on the idea that these two things were important, in the sense
Yeah.
that like when I went into the startup world and basically said, hey, I am pretty darn convinced. And I will say this, I think from a strategic standpoint, Slack had reached a point where they needed an acquisition.
Yeah.
It would have been hard to fight this war against Microsoft Teams and win
Mm,
as a standalone. So a dance
yeah.
partner seemed to make strategic sense, and that's easy for me to see because I was sitting inside the four walls. I was elated that it was Salesforce. It kind of brings me back to my roots and
Yeah.
kind of feels a little bit rewarding to
Right.
that instinct that these two things together would be meaningful.
Right.
Uncle Mark stepped up and gave us 27.8 billion reasons why it's meaningful.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point. Like, I mean, Slack as a product was extremely successful if you
Mhm,
count like the whole landscape of products,
mhm,
right? Like
mhm,
what 99% of them fail.
mhm.
But there is a an upper limit, right? Where you start running into the Microsoft or the Oracle or the SAP and they start saying, am I going to crush you or buy you? Right. And
Mhm,
I'm sure that was
mhm.
a question within Salesforce at some point, right? Like,
Well,
um,
and yeah, the other one was the idea for Slack because we're so heavily embedded in IT and DevOps that like AWS, hanging around
yeah,
out there because you look at the overlap of AWS licensing and Slack licensing in an IT organization, and it's tremendous.
right.
So a lot of people, yeah. So that was the kind of the two suitors. The Salesforce one was definitely. They were always on the map because they're a growth by acquisition company. They're
Yeah,
at that level of maturity where their innovation is coming by acquisition. It's not coming by developing inside their four walls
right, right, right,
to
right.
an extent.
Yeah. And does it feel like you're at Salesforce now, or does it still feel like
No,
Slack?
I still have like two Chrome profiles. I have a Slack email address. I have a Salesforce email address. It's still a disjointed experience.
Okay.
It's changing daily. Kind of onboarding to Salesforce while doing your day job. It feels like I have two jobs sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. I will say that the experience with Wipro and Aperio has served me well.
Yeah.
To just kind of understand that it takes a while. It's a little awkward. It
Yeah.
continues to integrate a click more with every quarter, and
Yeah.
every year, and it doesn't, happen right overnight. It has been interesting to see that Salesforce is definitely prioritizing this acquisition, unlike some of the others that we've seen in terms
Yeah.
of go to market and energy and focus put behind what the
Right.
product means to the rest of the product base. So they're
Right.
definitely accelerating it, I believe, as compared to other acquisitions. But
Right.
yeah, I did go to CKO last week for Salesforce, so that was a
Okay.
big moment to say yes. I feel like I work here. Um,
Yes.
I was in a fake campground with stuffed animals everywhere, and
Right.
yeah, so I felt like
Do you
yeah,
have
I
a
work
favorite
at Salesforce.
one? Is it Cody or Ruth or?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of did Cody. I think it's his vest, right? He wears a
Okay.
vest, doesn't he? I wear a
Okay.
vest. I think I'm wearing one right now.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes. An
that's all it takes
Astros
for me.
classic, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, you're at CKO. That's what was that like? It was just
Yeah.
drinking from the
Well,
fire hose, I'm sure.
yeah. Well, and you know what? It felt good to be back in an event. That was number one. So it kind of like there was a taste for people to want to kind of get around and high five and
Right.
do the rah rah because it is a company kickoff. It's it's execs getting excited. But just the component to kind of like feel like you were back into that motion of doing something in person in the name of
Right.
building your business, it just kind of felt pretty good. And um, I think Salesforce did, a pretty darn good job of, getting people out to a location, keeping it
Yeah.
entertained. They've got technology to support kind of safety things and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So that was in play. I think what they're pointing at is that they want to get into more of this, and there will be events, world tour events will be happening in person,
Yeah.
throughout this calendar year. And I think that's good for kind of all of us in the industry. I bet,
Right.
the SI partners more than anything, their business
Yeah.
development people were like, God, I'd love to get back out to a Dreamforce or a world tour event, get
Right.
in front of some customers, understand what deals are happening, where's the growth, stuff like
Right.
that. So that part was felt kind of nice.
Yeah. I mean, you did mention the troubles. The COVID pandemic. I don't know if you've heard of that. We've
Oh,
had a
yeah, is that
pandemic.
yeah? Part one or part two? Which one did you like better?
But I guess what I'm getting at is like, as far as software goes, I mean, Zoom got huge during
Hmm.
COVID, but Slack, it became readily apparent that work from home model for a lot of companies is not optional, right? Especially like knowledge workers. How did COVID affect Slack?
You know what? It was very ironic. So I was interviewing. I was set to fly out to San Francisco for my like round of interviews the week that they closed the office out there, roughly like March 20th or 17th
Yeah.
or somewhere around there. And so I completed my interview process as one of the first cohorts that did everything the remote onboarding, right?
Yeah.
But in the process, they were saying that it's an in the office culture, and seemed foreign to me, right?
Yeah.
Particularly our experiences at Aperio, we were ahead of this curve a long time ago,
Mm.
enabling the mobile workforce. Do you remember that go-to-market
Right.
message? I think it was
Yeah.
2014, perhaps. Um, so, but it struck me because I was a Slack user and working remotely, and I was like, "This is Slack. Why would we be in the office? It could be anywhere,
Yeah. Right.
And I had grown accustomed to that's the way I work now because it had been 7 years of kind of independent,
Yeah.
work from home, and then an enabling technology like this that we haven't quite seen yet, and then to find out that as an organization they're heavy in the office focus, kind of struck me a little bit, and I think the learning was this is what all companies learned is that one, without a compelling event, change is just something that it's just easier not to do it, right?
Right.
So the forcing function of everybody having to be at home, and guess what, all of their systems and hardware is already suited to work from wherever, right?
Yeah.
It's cloud systems with Macs. Okay, we could do this anywhere,
Yeah.
and some teleconferencing, software that maybe we didn't quite use as much. And everybody ran to it, right? Because
Yeah.
they stood up the MVP, as we would say, right?
Yeah.
Um, I can meet with my team and look at them, and we can still get our work done.
Yeah.
I think what lies ahead now is actually adopting this as a paradigm is what, not to turn into a commercial, but the digital headquarters kind of paradigm
Yes.
that Salesforce is putting in the market is to say you need to have a floor plan to your DHQU like you would your actual headquarters, right? So there's this
Wow.
paradigm that exists out there to say, hey, how do I set this up so my employees aren't in 15 Zoom meetings a day What does
Right.
asynchronous work mean? And how do we provide a and strategy? It's not an or strategy. And that's one I
Right.
used to take. That's one of yours I stole over the years. Um, so I think kind of that's it. And there's work to be done for organizations to stand up these digital environments and know that they're optimized, they're being successful, as opposed to what we did for the
Yeah.
last 2 years. We did what we had to do. We just ran at it and stood up the minimum, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so
I guess one more work question. So I
yeah,
talk to a lot of people who have small firms, and there's a
yep,
lot of small firms out there. And
yep,
if they're thinking, hey, I want to be an implementation partner of Slack,
yep.
how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, great question. And like one, we need skills. So like I would say the first thing is and I hate to put it in these terms, but there's solid content that's out there. When I say skills, if you're a Salesforce partner, going to the partner learning community, and accessing role-based content to learn how to deliver a Slack project. It's there, it's available, it's self-service. Two is those product certifications, like being an admin or being a developer. I mean, you're hearing it. I listened to one of your previous episodes with Mike Martin, and you guys
Yeah.
spent time talking about labor, which I find compelling, because there's a shortage. Everyone's talking about it, and this is a newer platform that's got nuance on it. So the skills for developers and tech architects is massive. So it's like
Right.
skills development, beginning to learn the four corners of the room, and be as brief as I can on this one. But hey, when Salesforce replaced Siebel, it was kind of like, hey, I already know what a CRM is, right?
Yes.
And I know what sales processes are. I just have a better mousetrap now, and I have a platform that I have to kind of learn.
Yeah.
Slack, we don't have a proxy for, hey, you used to implement this mousetrap, now you're going to implement this one. So
Right.
there's kind of a learning curve to the platform, because there's not a proxy for a channel driven, channel collaboration, enterprise collaboration solution, right? Like we don't even have a
Yeah.
category yet in the quadrant. So
Okay.
how is anybody going to have a proxy to know how to go implement it? They're
Right.
not.
You got to get that quadrant.
Yeah, we got to get a category. Somebody
Got
categorize us, please. Please, I'm dying over
to.
here.
Yeah. So, what? It's been great talking to you, Brian. What do you do when you're not working?
I play as much golf as I can. It's weather restricted,
Yeah.
obviously here in Chicago, but I do that. We've got a couple dogs here in the house. We got
Mhm.
Ryder and Bella, my wife Melissa, and we like to go down to Florida when it's cold in Chicago.
Yes.
We enjoy the beaches and the pools of the world. The golf courses along the way,
Yes.
and I think like most, just kind of family and friends in the downtime, work and a little bit of travel, and
Right.
just try and enjoy the ride, Mr.
Yeah,
Gore.
well, I miss working with you. There's a lot of stories I tell people about my days with Brian Reynolds that I won't tell here. But if you meet me in person at one of these events over a few beers, I might say something. So,
I mean, some of the absolute best moments in the career, not only on the fun side. I try to bring a little levity to the work. There's no doubt about it. But
yeah.
from a learning standpoint and from just like one of the brighter minds to be around, I got a lot of career development out of working with John Gorup.
Well,
So
thank you so much, sir.
yeah,
All
good luck
right,
on
we're
this
in the middle.
project, and I'll let you go. It sounds like you need to get to dinner.
Yeah, you heard my daughter
Right.
yelling. So it's
Yeah.
it's the work from home model. I've been doing it for how long now? 3 years now, or
Yeah.
seems like forever. All right,
All right,
sir.
bud. Well, we'll follow up soon. Be good.
Thank you, Brian. Take care.